Economics, Social Life, and Politics in the Gilded Age, Part 2. Leisure time. So, Americans, with all of these newfangled inventions that are occurring in the industrialization and urbanization, end up having more leisure time. So, what are they doing with it? You have a reduction in work hours, plus advertising, plus a decline in Puritan values of this idea that people shouldn't play. Well, that equals entertainment. So you have theaters popping up, vaudeville circuses moving from town to town, Buffalo Bills Wild West show, spectator sports such as baseball, boxing, basketball, and football take off, and the World's Fair is occurring on a regular basis. So here you have the circus, Barnum and Bailey show. Harry Houdini gets his start in the late 1800s. So some vaudeville acts, they were these variety shows that occurred in theaters in towns. Sometimes they were racy, they were intended for men only a lot of times. You had burlesque dancers and comedians, people dancing and singing in blackface, mocking African Americans, etc. And then you had the World's Fair in 1893. Some more vaudeville acts, puppets, comedy, those sorts of things. So just a good historical read if you're looking for some extra credit. The Devil in the White City. It's a great book that actually talks about the 1893 World's Fair and the architecture at the time, talking about some pretty famous architects and the construction of an entire city within the city of Chicago. But it alternates chapters with a murder mystery, with a serial killer that was at work in Chicago at the time. It's actually really quite the page turner, and you learn quite a bit about history, so check it out. Speaking of leisure time, with all your free time in AP US history, read a book. Here you have some examples of the sporting events that were occurring. You know, the first baseball, large organized baseball games in stadiums. Boxing was very popular. John Sullivan was a heavyweight boxer. You have William Howard Taft, the president, throwing in the first baseball at national baseball games. Politics. Let's talk about the politics of the time. It's kind of crazy. There was this belief that government involvement in the economy should be limited. This was called laissez-faire or hands-off economics. There was also this idea of social Darwinism, which we spoke about earlier in part 1, where Europeans and Anglo-Saxons sort of believed that because of their social position, that was evidence that they were superior to the other people in the rest of the world, and that with that came the need to take care of them, a very paternalistic view of the world. Also, there was a narrow interpretation of the government's power to regulate business. This was reinforced by the Supreme Court when they determined through several court cases that corporations were people and that they had the same rights as people. So corporations were individuals and they had the rights of individuals, which you'll see becomes a sticky wicket later and shows you how they can influence and wield a lot of power that way. You also have political parties that were using this system of patronage that was actually established by the Andrew Jackson administration to give party faithful powerful offices within the government. And a lot of times it was related to kickbacks and bribes, etc. It's basically using the spoil system. So reformers were pretty upset about this, but they didn't manage to get a foothold for a while. So there were some big issues. You have the patronage. In 1881, some reformers managed to get the Pendleton Civil Service Act passed, which actually said that you had to be qualified for the government job that you were applying for, and you couldn't just be a friend of a good elected official, or how much you had to give in a bribe. Tariffs were important. Remember, this was the only way that the government at this point was generating revenue. There was no income tax at this point. So tariffs, taxes on income, or on imports rather, were the way the government generated revenue. Farmers opposed tariffs because they lost overseas markets when they did that. Industries liked tariffs because it meant that Americans bought American-made goods. So it was kind of, you had some tension there with tariffs. And then there was this issue of the money supply. Should we expand it? And how should we expand it? Debtors, farmers, and startup businessmen wanted more money in circulation, which meant there would be credit so that they could invest that in their businesses and hire more people, etc. So they wanted to borrow money at low interest rates and pay those loans back with inflated dollars. Creditors, bankers, and investors wanted hard money. They wanted that money to be deflated in value so that they made more money and made profit on this. So all of this was pretty, these were the big political issues in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You have a political party that comes out of this called the Greenback Party. They wanted paper money not backed by gold or silver. Congress passed an act to pull back the last of the greenbacks. There were demands for silver money. Congress also stopped coining silver money until there were new supplies of silver found in Nevada and Idaho. And then people wanted more of it in circulation. So there's this argument back and forth. Should we have a paper money supply? Should that paper money supply be backed by gold, or should it be backed by silver? And it was very contentious at the time. In 1893, we have another economic depression. The stock market crashes, silver prices crash, gold reserves are low, and there's a very high tariff called the Wilson-Gorham tariff in 1894. The tariff gets lowered, and there is a 2% income declared on incomes over $2,000. This is our first attempt at an income tax to generate revenue to get away from tariffs, but the court deems it unconstitutional. As a result, you have unemployed people that march on Washington asking for the government to create public works programs and infrastructure programs to create jobs. Out of this comes the Populist Party. You have members of the farmers' alliances across the Midwest and the West who help to get senators elected to Congress. The alliance forms their own party called the Populist Party or the People's Party, and they meet to draft a party platform, and they demanded a government of the people. So this is sort of a third party in our two-party system. This platform called for the direct election of senators instead of having state legislatures select senators. By enacting laws through referendum and initiative, that means voters get to vote on laws. They called for the unlimited coinage of silver to increase the money supply. They called for a graduated income tax. They wanted government ownership of telegraph and telephone systems. They wanted loans and federal warehouses for farmers to use, and an 8-hour workday for industrial workers. So it was really the People's Party. They were trying to be popular among the working class. They failed to attract Southern farmers who feared that they would unite poor blacks. Oh, look, it gets bigger. Election of 1896, you have two men running. The Democrats split over the gold standard issue. You had some that were gold bugs and some that were in favor of free silver. William Jennings Bryan becomes the Democratic nominee, and he gives a pretty powerful, fiery speech called the Cross of Gold speech, saying that Democrats should use silver instead of gold for the standard behind our money. And he got a lot of support from populists because of this. The Republicans nominated William McKinley, who ran on increasing the tariff platform and not having an income tax. And ultimately, in the election of 1886, William McKinley wins. Gold is discovered in Alaska, which makes the silver issue moot. So the gold standard is now stable again. Populists decline and disappear at this point. The Republicans begin to adopt some of the Populist Party platform. Republicans begin an era of dominance in the United States, and they become the party of business and industry and strong national government. They also have strong showings in urban areas among the urban poor, and this is essentially the evolution of the modern political parties and modern political campaigns, where people use lots of money to publicize elections and candidates. There's William McKinley. That's the end of that show.